Texas on the Rise and Awakening. Surprise! I am, as always, your host, Christopher Paul Dugdale, MEDMA. We are Duncanville High School in these United States, and today is November 5th, 2020. And on this date, 45 years ago today, I was supposed to be born, but guess what? Just like you, I put things off. Poor mom. They had to cut me out like a reverse Tauntaun scene from Empire Strikes Back. On the other hand, today is Guy Fawkes Day, the day that a man tried to change Britain by blowing up Parliament. They had all the explosives underneath Parliament, and they failed at the last moment. So, everyone have a great day today, and try not to blow up Parliament today. So, moving on. Mexican independence. This all starts in 1810 when Padre Miguel Hidalgo y Costilla da un grito de llores. So he started the Mexican independence movement, gives out a cry for independence, and is executed as a result of this. Okay, Mexico will ultimately win its independence in 1821. We're working towards Texas independence today, and so this is kind of a recap to get us to where we are right now. So Mexico has its independence. Okay, so then Central and South America also are going to win their independence, and most of these nations, as you can see, have won their independence by 1822. Okay, Brazil has theirs by 1829, and then you've got a few Caribbean islands who have it at a later date, but for the most part, the majority of South and Central America all have their independence from a pretty early date. So, basically, well, let's talk about this first problem, and then we'll work our way through this. So, the people in Texas are called Tejanos. They refuse to move to North Texas because of the Comanche and Apache, who are just terrorizing the northern part of the state because they don't want, people to go in and murder them and take away their land. It's kind of weird that they have that policy, that they don't want to be killed, which really makes a lot of sense. So then Mexico's looking for someone to go and tame that land. Now, who is good at murdering Native Americans or forcing them out of their land? Well, that would be the North Americans, okay, the white people of North America. So anyway, so Moses Austin goes and talks to Spain. Whenever they're having this problem getting people to move north. He goes up and makes a deal with Spain to bring in some families. Then he dies. So his son, Stephen, goes in to make sure he still has the deal, and they're like, cool. So he goes back to try and get things together, and then Mexican independence happens, and they're starting over. But Mexico also wants to make sure they secure this land, so they make a deal with Moses. So Moses goes back to get all the families together, getting ready to move into Texas, and whenever he's going back to get all the families, then Mexico goes from an empire to a republic, so he has to go down and do this again. So he is the first successful agent to draw people in. Whenever he goes back to Mexico, when they go from being an empire, he was down there talking to him at that time and gets jailed, but eventually he gets a contract to bring in people. So to move in, all you have to do is you have to become Mexican citizens and Catholic. So that means no slavery, okay? But once the doors are open, people start flooding in, and they bring slaves. I know that's shocking, but they brought in slaves even though that was against the law. So we're going to fast forward just a few years. And Texas, what they really wanted in the beginning was just to have their own state. They did not want to be part of Coahuila, so they didn't want to be Coahuila y Tejas, they just want to be Tejas. Okay, so they get together and meet in Gonzales. They capture a cannon from the Mexicans. They put up a big flag that says "Come and get it." Okay, so they buried the tank so no one can find it. But anyway, so that's kind of the first battle. So now they're sitting in the Alamo. They're ready to take a stand. Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna, who is the leader of Mexico, he's going to go in and put down this rebellion himself in person. So he's going to march with 5,000 troops. By the way, everyone calls him Santa Anna, but it's really a pretty stupid thing to call him because his name is Antonio Lopez. He is just from Santa Anna, which is a city over on the east coast of Mexico. And so he goes and personally attacks the Alamo. Now, you've heard that story. It's a lot like the 300, the 300 Spartans that hold off the army of the Persians. But in this case, there's 187 Texans and 187 Texans, and then there's 5,000 Mexicans in this battle. Okay, but the truth is they had to march about 1,300 miles on foot. Okay, and once you march 1,300 miles, you're gonna wanna rest, and they rested for about 12 days before the final siege. But the way that we always told the story was that the Texans held them off for 13 days, so it makes it sound much more heroic instead of the Texans shot at them while they were all napping and resting after they were exhausted, and then they were beaten in one morning. Instead, you've changed the narrative quite a bit, and you've made them seem much more heroic. And they were heroic, and only a few people survive. You have a slave that was there, who was brought in to fight, and a woman and her daughter. So those are the three survivors. Davy Crockett was famous for going, and there were a lot of people that had moved from Tennessee to come in. That's part of the reason they call it the volunteer state, Tennessee, that is. And Davy Crockett as well will surrender. So right around the day of, and by the way, you could go in and out of the Alamo. They could have all left, and none of them would have died at that point. Now, they were supposed to have reinforcements, and that would have come in the form of the 350 troops from Goliad. Now, it's possible that having 525 to 550 troops to fight from a secured location could have overcome the numbers where they were outnumbered 10 to 1. It's possible that might have made a difference, but Colonel Fannin saw the Mexican army coming and just immediately surrendered. He and his men were marched, and then all of them were shot. There were about 6 or 7 people that were under the pile of dead bodies that crawled out in the middle of the night and ran to safety. But in general, if you're in a war, you don't really want to take that type of... you don't want to do that because, generally what they'll do is they'll end up shooting into the crowd or running a bayonet through everyone to make sure that they're dead. But they just did it so late in the day that day, they didn't have a chance to do that. So this is the Texas independence movement, and 2 of the first 3 battles are just major failures. But Sam Houston was named commander-in-chief of the armies, and he's going to regroup and launch a major offensive. And this is going to be at the Battle of San Jacinto. Okay, and here Sam Houston with 900 troops defeats 1,300 people in the Mexican army and captures Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna. And, they defeat them by attacking in the middle of the day during siesta time. And people may make fun of siesta time, but in truth, being in Texas during the hottest part of the day, taking a nap, is pretty brilliant, except whenever you're in a war, and then you want to be careful doing that. So, Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna was about to get away. He was dressed in one of his men's uniforms, and he was just going to be with everyone else, and then eventually we'll release him because we're not going to feed that many people, take away their weapons, and send them home. So, right as he's about to get away, one of his men yells out, "El Presidente!" and it's kind of all over. So, after the Battle of San Jacinto, you have captured the leader of the other army and the leader of the nation that controls you. So they make Sam Houston the very first president. They legalized slavery, and they banned all free African Americans from the state, or African Texans, I guess is the correct term. They made treaties with France, Belgium, and Holland, and the fact that Texas grew so much cotton made it really of interest to both Britain and the United States. And Britain really wanted Texas to stay independent so that they had someone else to buy cotton from instead of just the United States. Now, this whole theory, this addition of territory through Texas, brings out this theory called slavocracy, that Texas and other territories added to the United States were only done to add slave states to the Union. Okay, which seems a little bit ridiculous. We're just trying to steal everything we can. I don't know that it was for slavery. It wasn't to stop the spread of slavery. I'll say that, but it wasn't just to spread that. We were money hungry as a nation, or land hungry as a nation. So now, if you remember on the last episode, you have William Henry Harrison is the President of the United States, and he dies from giving a speech. Okay? So he is replaced then by John Tyler. Okay? Look at that horrible haircut there. By the way, so John Tyler becomes president in 1840, and he has 2 living grandsons that are alive today 180 years later. So 180 years later, a president's grandchildren are still alive and kicking. Okay, so I don't know if that sounds ridiculous, but my grandfather died in 1979 and the other one in 1990, which were a long time ago, and this cat here has 2 grandchildren that are still alive today. Well, anyway, also he was the first president to get married while he was in the White House. His wife died, and he was so sad, and so all of his children came to visit, and his youngest daughter had a friend who was 20 whenever he was in his late 50s to early 60s, and so her little friend, was like, "I'm sorry, Mr. President, about what's happened to you," and he was like, It's like, "I would like to engage you in marriage and coitus and have children with you." And she's like, "I don't know, Mr. President." Well, they had 7 children together. So he was nearly 60 and she was 20, and they had some kids together. So he signs a Whig bill to end the independent treasury, and they keep trying to recreate the Bank of the U.S., and despite bill after bill, he keeps vetoing them, and eventually they're going to kick him out of the party. It's the only time in history a president has ever been kicked out of his own political party. He also helps annex Texas to the United States. While it was a major issue because of the number of slave states that might have come out of it, they still go ahead and do that. And it just took a simple 50% majority instead of 2/3 of the House and 2/3 of the Senate. He also caused a major problem with Mexico, who's hoping to bring Texas back in the fold, and also made it look like the U.S. was complicit in what happened with Texas. So, moving on. The Aroostook War. Okay, the Aroostook War was a war over the border of Maine. Okay, now I guess I didn't talk much about this, but during the Missouri Compromise, it made Missouri into a slave state and Maine into a free state. So up until 1820, Maine was actually part of Massachusetts. Okay, and so there was some question about territory on whether or not belonged to Britain or to the U.S. So Lord Ashburton, which sounds like a very British name, negotiated along with Daniel Webster to create the Webster-Ashburton Treaty. And this settled the border between Maine and Canada. And, in addition to getting that land there, or, giving up that land there, the U.S. is going to get the Mesabi Range of iron ore in Minnesota. And that's actually going to be the northernmost point of the continental United States. A lot of people think that Maine is the northernmost state in the United States, but in truth, it's Minnesota. And in addition to Minnesota being farther north than Maine, so is Montana, so is Idaho, not to be accused with I am a hoe, but Idaho, and Washington State. And also North Dakota, if I didn't say that before, but if I did say North Dakota, then I should probably also tell you that North Dakota was one of the states as well. So anyway, all those things happened because of the Arstook War. Now, also during this time period, you have a massive growth of urbanization. Okay, the massive growth of cities, and I did talk about this earlier. Okay, so in 1790, there were only 2 cities in the United States with over 20,000 people in it. Okay, and that's New York and Philadelphia. And by 1860, just 70 years later, you have 43 cities over 20,000 people. You know, to put it in better terms, if you had Duncanville today in the U.S. in 1790, it would have been the third largest city in the United States. Pow! Yeah, what are you going to do with that information? Learn! So during this time period, you have a really increasing mark in voter participation. It went from 1 in 4 people to 80% by 1860. So you have a majority of the population voting really from 1828 on, you know, because of all the, because of the corrupt bargain in 1824, it got a lot more people out to vote. Now, let's go ahead and move on. Starting in the 1840s, there's an explosion in the construction of new roads and canals throughout the United States. Okay, so roads are built from the northern parts of the United States all the way to the southern parts of the United States. You've got primary roads and some smaller secondary roads, but you also have an explosion of canals built, and almost all of those are built in the north. And a lot of the tariffs and the sale of federal lands are used to build these canals and roads in the north particularly. And this caused some division in the United States because the southern states aren't receiving half of these new roads as the north is. In fact, you know, you have such a concentration, it just makes it easy for travel in the north. In fact, if you look at over on the right hand side, you know, you see that, you know, transportation is really slow in the southern states, but most of the northern states you can get through most of those territories to you know, the second layer of states pretty quickly. By 1857, this all changes, and with the expansion of the railroad, you can get, you know, as far as St. Louis in Missouri within just a couple of days by the railroad. So this is one of the major changes that take place. And the railroad all starts in 18. Whenever the railroad was invented, they were mixing together some Bunsen burners and beakers, and it explodes, and then all of a sudden they see a locomotive. Well, maybe that's not how it worked. So within 32 years of its creation, they actually had 30,000 miles. 32 years, yes. They had 30,000 miles of tracks. Okay, and you can see that explosion, but if you look at the explosion of the railroad tracks, almost all of them are in the northern United States. So while slavery is a major point in the expansion of, or the cause of the Civil War, you also have to look at the concentration of wealth in the north, and the Southerners feel more and more like they're being detached from what's going on. The Pony Express is one of the most overrated things in U.S. history. They make it sound like it ran for 50 to 100 years, but in truth it was only about 16 months that it was being used. You could carry mail for 2,000 miles from Missouri to California in 10 days, so cover 2,000 miles in 10 days with multiple riders. You had people jumping on horses and riding as fast and as hard as they can until they got to the next station, then someone else did the same thing. They wanted people that were under the age of 18 because the odds were there was a pretty decent chance you were going to die doing this. Either you're going through land that doesn't belong to you as in the form of Native Americans, or going through mountain trails where you might find yourself and your horse down dead at the base of a mountain. So that was a Pony Express, and whenever they finished the transcontinental telegraph line, there's no need to send everything overland by horse with someone carrying it by hand. Now I give you Alexis de Tocqueville. He's a Frenchman who comes over to look at the United States and give it an evaluation. Okay, and he said, really, the United States has succeeded because of five five really crucial things. Okay? Number one is liberty. People are naturally free, and it's a government's job to protect everyone's individual freedom. Two is egalitarianism, or equality. All citizens enjoy equal rights before the law and are equal before the law. And that's kind of true unless you're talking about minorities. But in theory, everyone's supposed to be equal in the view of the war. Okay. Three is individualism. Society's based upon self-interest and self-reliance. So they're not looking for anyone to support them other than themselves. Populism. The ordinary man has favor and respect. Their votes are important and help put people in power. So you've got to respect all people. At least in theory, that's where de Tocqueville's coming up with this. And the last one is laissez-faire. The government stays out of private lives, particularly the economy. So this is something that can pop up in test, and really this is something you'll probably see on the STAR test. So just keep that in mind through the rest of the semester. And next semester, I guess. So here's another one of those things you need to remember for quite some time. So public education begins to explode during this time period because really two major reasons. One of them has to do with business. They need better employees where, they find that literate employees are better employees. You also have the first attempt at educating all these future voters, and you want them to be able to figure out who they're voting for and what each side stands for. So that's part of the education push. So for business and for future voters. Now, a lot of this is under Horace Mann. That's him on the right-hand side. Not Horseman, and not Bojack Horseman. This is a whole different thing. His name is Horace Mann. He starts public schools in Massachusetts. He tries to get longer terms for the school, better pay for the teachers, and more curriculum. They use Noah Webster's textbooks, and Noah Webster also is credited for taking the dictionary and standardizing American English. So that would be a great test question on your next test: is who standardized American English? And it was Noah Webster and his dictionary. McGuffey's readers were used in English classes, and they were still being used as of the 1940s as kind of a standard for creating American culture. Okay, so moving on. Prison conditions, we talked about these briefly. Debtors' prisons had several people indebted for as little as $1 in today's money. If you didn't pay after, and you sat in prison for a certain period of time, they would brand you, and they would brand you on the thumbs because most transactions were finished, with the handshake. Okay, and so you've heard of a handshake deal before. It's because that's how they would, confirm a lot of the transactions that they had. So handshake deals, and they would brand a P on their thumb. So whenever you shook someone's hand and you felt the P on your hand, then you knew that you shouldn't do business with them. Dorothea Dix travels 60,000 miles over 8 years, and she writes on the condition in asylums, and she's working to try and fix what's going on in asylums. And I talked earlier about how many people were just put in to prison cells with other people, and many of the prisoners were raped while they were in jail because they were all chained up. There was no type of treatment to try and help people that were in there for mental conditions. The American Temperance Society is a group of mainly women that worked against the consumption and sale of alcohol. And as I said earlier, they were successful in 1918, and that's going to lead to prohibition in the United States for about 15 years. So, some of the success of the Great Awakenings. By the way, I was lying. The women's movement also is put together at this time, and it's put together. Hear me out before you judge what I'm saying. It's really stupid why it's put together. So the whole anti-slavery movement really is the brainchild of a bunch of women in the North, and they're really pushing hard to bring together this abolition movement. And they start organizing things. They push their husbands to become part of it, and they get a large faction of men to go with them to London in 1840 for the World Anti-Slavery Convention. And when they get there, the men tell the women to wait outside while they go in and take care of business. Okay? So the women's movement starts there basically in the lobby of the World Anti-Slavery Convention because they weren't allowed in. I'm not saying that women should have equal rights, but dear God, dudes, what's wrong with you guys? Let them into the meeting so, you can end slavery, as if, oh no, we have women's support, that doesn't mean anything, or that will hurt the movement. But anyway. But yeah, so the women's movement really starts securely in 1840 at the World Anti-Slavery Convention. Susan B. Anthony will dedicate her life to women's rights, and she'll go around touring the country and giving speeches to try and get support for the rights of the ladies. Now, at Seneca Falls, you have the Seneca Falls Convention in 1848, and this is where all the movers and shakers get together for the Declaration of Sentiments, which is basically a rewording of the Declaration of Independence, but it says that all men and women are created equal. Okay? This is led by Lucretia Mott and Elizabeth Cady Stanton, both pictured to the left. And they're demanding equality in both voting and economic and political rights in the United States. So all of those things are demanded together. Okay? Seneca Falls will definitely be on the test, so double, triple state that, okay? We've ended yet another day today. So have a nice day, be safe, but be double safe. I'll see y'all in just a few days. This is Doug Dell out.